Welcome. Today we're conducting a deep dive, a psychological case study into a truly unique developmental environment, the world of the child star. We're going to move beyond the headlines to analyze the underlying psychological structures and adaptive mechanisms at play.
So let's begin with the central question that will frame our entire analysis. When we observe a public figure who has grown up under intense scrutiny, are we actually seeing a single unified personality? Or is it perhaps something far more complex, what some psychologists might call a committee of the mind, an entire internal board of directors, each with a voice, debating every move?
You see, the focus of our study is this phenomenon of the rushed childhood. We're going to clinically analyze what happens when developmental stages are compressed and what the long-term effects are on identity, and specifically on the advanced strategies required for persona management in adulthood.
All right, Section 1. Let's begin by examining the primary adaptation, the high-resolution persona.
Now, it's crucial to understand that this public-facing identity isn't superficial. It's a profoundly complex, high-resolution cognitive strategy. Think of it as a sophisticated psychological shield, engineered specifically to manage constant, intense social evaluation, and, most importantly, to protect the core self, a mind that was forced to develop under extraordinary pressure.
So, what is the origin, the etiology of this complex persona? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to a specific developmental pressure.
And here we have the foundational concept for our analysis, parentification. Clinically, it's defined as a developmental process where a child is obligated to take on adult roles and responsibilities long before they are emotionally or cognitively ready. They effectively become a caregiver to themselves and sometimes even to the adults around them.
And the outcomes of this are significant and long-lasting. Individuals learn to suppress their own needs. They develop what we can call survival independence, an incredibly resilient but isolated state. This often leads to an inability to trust temporary support from others, because experience taught them that, ultimately, they are the only ones they can rely on. It fosters this core belief that they were born strong, not as a gift, but out of absolute necessity.
Now, this level of early life stress doesn't just shape behavior, it can actually impact neurological development. This brings us to a critical concept we'll call the split maturity trade-off.
So, think of the brain's development as having a finite amount of resources. Under this kind of pressure, the brain makes a trade-off. It accelerates the development of regions responsible for executive function and language, the tools needed to perform and navigate complex adult worlds. But this cognitive plasticity comes at the cost of emotional efficiency. Basic emotional needs go unmet, which creates a significant developmental imbalance.
And the result of this neural trade-off is a state of split maturity. On one hand, you have the producer self, this hyper-competent, wise, and responsible powerhouse. But it exists in direct conflict with the consumer self, the part that remains emotionally underdeveloped, the part that feels perpetually unfulfilled and even experiences guilt just for needing to rest.
So the question becomes, how does an individual manage this profound internal division while functioning in a high-stakes environment? Well, they develop a suite of highly sophisticated psychological management mechanisms.
And this quote gets to the very heart of it. That internal committee of the mind we talked about, it's not a pathology. It shouldn't be seen as confusion or a flaw. From a clinical perspective, it's actually a marker of high cognitive complexity, a necessary system for navigating a very complicated inner and outer world.
The primary data gathering tool for this internal committee is a mechanism called active observation. This is far more than just listening. It's a heightened, almost forensic state of awareness. It involves constantly processing subtle social cues, tone, microexpressions, logical inconsistencies, all in an effort to anticipate problems and effectively navigate social dynamics.
And this leads to a very different environmental response strategy. While many in high-pressure fields engage in typical sensation seeking for the dopamine reward, this individual adopts a protective, regulatory focus. They have to. They selectively organize and conserve their energy to avoid what we call ego depletion, because their creative and functional capacity is a resource that must be fiercely protected.
So, to summarize the toolkit, we have the committee of the mind to process internal conflict. We have active observation for external threat assessment. We have guarded empathy, which is the ability to read and understand others' emotions while maintaining a necessary protective boundary. And finally, the overarching regulatory focus, a kind of mental hygiene practice to prevent burnout.
So, we've identified the etiology and the complex coping mechanisms. Now, let's turn to the final and most crucial phase, the process of integration.
How can one begin to heal this internal split?
A powerful technique for this is something we'll term verbal fabrication. This is all about consciously reframing the internal conversation. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset, from being a judge who passes sentence on your thoughts to becoming a craftsperson who sees thoughts as raw material to be shaped and utilized for an intentional outcome.
So here's the clinical procedure for this reset. Step 1. Simply observe a thought without judgment. Like, I'm only valuable if I'm producing. Step 2. Consciously adopt the craftsperson mindset. Step 3. Evaluate the action that thought produces, not yourself. And then step 4 is the critical question. If I were to live by this thought for the next 24 hours, what behavior would result? And if that behavior leads to stress or self-alienation, then step 5, you simply discard the thought. Like a craftsman discards a faulty piece of material. It's not useful for what you're trying to build.
And that brings us to the conclusion of our case study. Let's synthesize our findings. And here is the core conclusion. The high-resolution persona is not the person. It must be understood as a complex, necessary, and often brilliant adaptation for survival, a psychological construct that is actively fabricated, maintained, and navigated moment by moment. And so we'll conclude by turning the analysis inward for a moment. We all possess an internal committee: the producer, the protector, the critic, the inner child. The question to leave you with is this: which of your internal committee members is speaking the loudest in your own mind today?